Who was Locatelli?
Играем каприз Локотелли «Лабиринт» в инструментовке Геннадия Николаевича Рождественского.
Pietro Locatelli was a master violinist and successful businessman who moved from Italy to Holland, where he would make his fortune. Locatelli's works are mainly for the violin, an instrument on which he was a virtuoso. His most significant publication is probably the Arte del Violino Opus 3, a collection of 12 concertos for the instrument, which incorporate 24 technically demanding capriccios or caprices. His early works show the influence of Arcangelo Corelli, while later pieces are closer to Antonio Vivaldi in style. L'Arte del Violino, printed in Amsterdam in 1733, was one of the most influential musical publications of the early 18th century. It is a collection of 12 concertos for solo violin, strings and basso continuo, with a capriccio for unaccompanied violin inserted into the first and last movements of each concerto as a sort of cadenza. The caprices correspond to the movements of the 12 concertos, 2 per concerto. Modern editions sometimes refer to them as 24 or 25 caprices, with the final caprice, the one we've heard, Il Labirinto Armonico, the harmonic labyrinth, being particularly famous. These highly demanding pieces were revolutionary in their time, exploring extreme technical difficulties, including high positions, double stops, and rapid passage work, and are considered precursors to the famous 24 Caprices by Niccolo Paganini. The Italian composer and violinist Pietro Antonio Locatelli was born in Bergamo, Italy. Little is known about Locatelli's childhood. In his early youth, he was the third violinist and held the title of virtuoso in the Cappella Musicale, the musical establishment of the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore in Bergamo. Later he moved to Rome in 1711 when he was 16, where he might have studied with Corelli, but more likely was a pupil of Valentini, possibly also Ludovico Ferronati and Carlo Antonio Marino. Why is it that some doubt that he studied with Corelli? Well, in 1712 the illustrious master was already a sick man and was to die in the next year. It is, however, possible that Locatelli may have met and studied with Corelli. Locatelli began studying in Rome in the autumn of 1711, probably under Antonio Montanari or Giuseppe Valentini. At the time, Rome was a stimulating environment for a young musician, and it was there that Locatelli matured his art, benefiting from the abundance of musical activities offered by its many chapels and private academies. In a letter dated 17th of March 1714, Locatelli wrote to his father in Bergamo that he was a confirmed member of the Compita Accademia di Vari Strumenti, the household musicians of Prince Michelangelo I Gaetani, who lived between 1685 and 1759, where Valentini had worked as a violinist and composer since no later than 1710. Between 1716 and 1722, Locatelli was also a member of the Congregazione Generale dei Musici di Santa Cecilia, and thus under the protection of the noble prelate and future cardinal Camillo Cibo. He also assisted other Roman noble houses, often including that of Cardinal Pietro Ottoboni in the church of San Lorenzo e San Damaso, probably until the 7th of February 1723. While in Rome, Locatelli debuted as a composer in 1721. His 12 Concerti Grossi, Opus 1, dedicated to Camillo Cibo, was published in Amsterdam. Locatelli spent some years of pilgrimage, so to speak. He won a reputation as a virtuoso performing in Italy, Bavaria and Berlin from 1723 to 1728. Locatelli travelled through Italy and Germany. Mantua, Venice, Munich, Dresden, Berlin, Frankfurt and Kassel are amongst the places he's known to have visited. Most of his concert compositions, including the violin concertos and the capricci, were probably written in this period, but were published later in Amsterdam. It is believed that his performances made him famous. One notice describes Locatelli's visit to Munich. On the 26th of June 1727, the foreign virtuoso Locatelli was paid 12 double golden guilder by the Elector's Director of Music. In May 1728, Locatelli visited the Prussian court in Berlin. He moved from Dresden to Potsdam with Augustus II and the Elector's escort of about 500 people, including Johann Georg Pisendel, Johann Joachim Quantz and Silvius Leopold Weiss. A notice about Locatelli's performance before Frederick William I anecdotally describes the musician's self-assurance and his vanity in wearing gorgeous diamond-studded clothes. The Dutch musicologist Albert Dunning speculated that the aristocratic listeners may have preferred Johann Gottlieb Graun's violin playing to Locatelli's. According to an entry in a rich autograph collector's records, Locatelli was living in Frankfurt on the 20th of October 1728. The entry includes a miniature version of the Andante from Sonata 3, Opus 2. Locatelli's last known stop was in Kassel, where he received the very high payment of 80 Reichshalle after his visit to Charles I, Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, on the 7th of December 1728. The organist Jacob Wilhelm Lustig stated in 1728 that Locatelli had astonished his listeners with hugely difficult passages while scraping at his violin. At each he attracted exceptional interest, but eventually his indomitable spirit, pride and sense of purpose prompted him to escape from the narrow bondage of the courts, and in 1729 he settled in Amsterdam, where he was to die in 1764. Locatelli's activity at the court of the regent of Mantua, the Landgrave Philip von Hessen-Darmstadt, is attested by a 1725 document in which the Landgrave refers to him as our virtuoso. How often and in what capacity Locatelli performed at that court is not known. Also unknown is the time of his activity in Venice, although he certainly went there. In 1729 he settled in Amsterdam, where he taught and conducted an amateur orchestra and was able to pursue his wider cultural interests. He stayed in Amsterdam until his death. A library with over 1,000 documents shows Locatelli's interest in literature and science. It includes ornithological, theological, church, historical, political, geographical, art historical and mathematical works, as well as literature on music dating back to the 16th century. His Nachlass includes all important writers from Dante on. Among the large quantity of printed and unbound sheet music are the collected works of Corelli. Also available are pictures by Dutch, Italian and French masters. All these things, as well as his instruments and much more, were auctioned in August 1765. He did not compose as much as previously while in Amsterdam, but gave violin lessons to amateurs and edited his Opus 1 to 9 and the works of other musicians such as Giovanni Battista Martini's Opus 2. His sparsely documented public and semi-public performances were open only to music lovers, not professional musicians. An Englishman who heard him in 1741 wrote, "He is so afraid of people learning from him that he won't admit a professed musician into his concert." Some rich music lovers who would play as amateurs with Locatelli helped him to become affluent. When Locatelli went to Amsterdam in 1729, he discovered a centre, or the centre, of European music publishing. He published his Opus 2 to 6, 8 and 9, and a new edition of Opus 1 in Amsterdam, and Opus 7 in the neighbouring city of Leiden. He took great care to achieve flawless editions. Locatelli gave the well-arranged works to different publishers, and he edited and sold the less arranged works. So what was the reason for Locatelli's move to Amsterdam? It had little to do with performance opportunities, in fact. Rather, Amsterdam was a centre of a thriving music publishing industry, and advanced technology for the time and an efficient network guaranteed wide international circulation. He collaborated with the publishing house of Roger and Lassen and obtained a renewable privilege to print his own music. He also gave regular Wednesday concerts in his own house, open only to music lovers and excluding professional musicians. And what were the advantages of being in Amsterdam? He was able to work there as a free musician, unfettered to a church or court. He could compose whatever and whenever he wanted. For an 18th century composer, this was highly exceptional. Apparently, while there, he had no pupils and never played in public due to his extreme shyness. On Wednesday evenings, he did, however, give concerts in private houses, which were highly fashionable amongst the city's beaux monde. And so here, surrounded by generous patrons of the wealthy Amsterdam nobility, Locatelli was able to devote himself to composition, above all to the publication and continual revision of his works. An operation that incidentally makes it very difficult, at times even impossible, to trace his stylistic development. Being a master of the violin, Locatelli preferred not to have professional musicians attend, because he was afraid of them imitating him. In his time, it was said that he never played a wrong note, except once when his little finger slipped and got stuck in the bridge of the instrument. Not only Opus 1 was composed in his early years, but also Opus 3 and parts of Opus 2 and 4 to 8. Locatelli obtained a privilege which protected Opus 1 to 8, which were also issued in Leiden in Holland, from unauthorised reprints and prevented the import of reprints. In his application for the privilege, he referred to himself as an Italian music master living in Amsterdam. As a consequence of the privilege, Locatelli had to give free copies to the Leiden University Library, thus the first prints have been preserved up to the present. An exception was Opus 9, which was published after the expiry of the legal protection. Locatelli's works can be divided into three main categories: works for his own performances as a virtuoso, representative works for larger ensembles, and chamber music and small works arranged for small ensembles. Locatelli's virtuosity is reflected in the capricci through the use of high registers, double stopping, chords and arpeggios with wide fingering and overextension of the left hand, harmonics, trills in two-part passages, trio del diavolo, double trills, varied bow types and variable bowing. In aristocratic circles, he was a recognised, admired and supported virtuoso and composer. In 1741, he set up a business selling violin strings from his home. Including taxes, he earned about 1,500 guilders in 1742 alone, the highest income of any musician from Amsterdam. It is unknown why, from 1744 when he released Opus 8 to 1762 when he released Opus 9, there were no reports of him from lexicographers, listeners or national and international music journalists. Locatelli died on the 30th of March 1764 at his house on the Prinsengracht. He was buried in the English Reformed Church on the Beginhof. In 2024, a small monument made by Fabio Bravisani was erected there in his honour. He was 68 years old when he died. Locatelli wrote a number of concerti grossi following the example of Corelli. The first set, published in Amsterdam in 1720, includes 12 fugues. L'arte del violino, The Art of the Violin, was published in 1733 and contains 12 violin concertos and 24 caprices, the precursors of Paganini's famous set for unaccompanied violin. A set of 6 concertos was published 2 years later, and another set of 6, published in 1744, is scored for 4 violins, 2 violas, and basso continuo. Locatelli combines the Roman style of Corelli with, in his solo concertos, the virtuosity of Vivaldi in Venice. Locatelli also published sets of trio sonatas and solo sonatas, including a set of the latter for flute and basso continuo. His small compositional output consists of a number of concerti grossi which follow in the footsteps of Corelli. His solo concertos, on the other hand, are deeply influenced by the virtuosity of Antonio Vivaldi. During his 35 years in Amsterdam, Locatelli became a highly successful businessman. When he passed away in 1764, he left behind a considerable estate, including a library with several thousand documents disclosing his interest in literature and science. Also included was a large collection of printed music and literature on music theory dating back to the 16th century. The states of Holland and West Friesland granted Pietro Locatelli permission to print his own music and sell it from home. In addition to selling his compositions, he also sold books he had acquired from all over Europe. They were about all sorts of subjects, in no way restricted to music alone, but embracing theatre, literature and visual art. As a composer and merchant, he was therefore able to support himself. Given his wealth when he died in 1764, with the enormous library that was discovered in his house and the extent to which his music circulated throughout Europe, he must have possessed a genuine Dutch commercial streak. What about his influence on Paganini? His virtuoso works with their associated capricci became standards for virtuosos and made him famous throughout Europe, even though they were exercise pieces not intended for public performance. Musicians like Niccolo Paganini discovered Locatelli's music, probably through French violin schools. The flute sonatas, the trio sonatas and the violin sonatas were popular in Amsterdam. His primary claim to fame originates with his publication L'arte del violino, The Art of the Violin, a collection of 12 violin concertos with 24 caprices for solo violin in the first and last movements of each concerto. The point of 24 caprices is that every major and minor key is explored. As a performer, Locatelli systematically explored the uncharted regions of the instrument, including left-hand extensions, double and triple stops, polyphonic passages, and double trills. Above all, he greatly expanded on the top register of the violin. Scholars and historians have suggested that he was in fact the founding father of modern instrumental virtuosity. Locatelli was one of the first great violinists who practiced virtuosity for virtuosity's sake, thereby extending the technical vocabulary of the violin. And in all likelihood, he also influenced J.S. Bach. Particularly the Concerto Grosso in F minor, Opus 1 number 8, was performed by Bach in the Collegium Musicum in Leipzig in 1734, 39 and 48. Locatelli must surely be allowed by all to be a terremoto. Mais pourtant, messieurs, quel coup d'archet, quel feu, quelle vitesse! He plays with so much fury upon his fiddle that, in my humble opinion, he must wear out some dozens of them in a year. These words were written by an English gentleman, a certain Thomas Dampier, and vividly portray one of the most enterprising, strong-willed and ultimately significant of 18th century instrumentalists, the composer and virtuoso violinist Pietro Antonio Locatelli. What is your favourite version of the Harmonic Labyrinth Caprice? I'm probably going to settle for Schering's playing. However, we'll end with a snippet from Menuhin's version.